Welcome to Table for 92, element number 75, rhenium. It's number 75 because it has exactly 75 protons within its nucleus. For rhenium, we're cooking up some traditional Westphalian wedding soup to celebrate the union of Walter and Ida Noddacks, the married couple that discovered rhenium. They are the first married couple to discover an element that I have covered so far, but not the first married couple that discovered an element in history. That would be Marie and Pierre Curie that discovered radium and polonium in 1898, 2 years after Ida Noddacks was born. This is really interesting because there was a big competition to fill in the missing parts of the periodic table in the early 20th century. Like, first off, the idea of a chemical element really took hold in the early 1800s. Before that, most educated people were still under the assumption put forward in ancient Greece that there were only 4 elements: earth, wind, water, and fire. That's not like a terrible idea if you were alive 2,500 years ago, but in the 1800s, as the drum of science marched on and the basic building blocks of the universe were being figured out, it led to the understanding that a chemical element is something that cannot be reduced into other substances. It's its own thing. That goes on, people all over the world, and actually not even the world, observed in space on the sun, see my episode about helium, started discovering elements everywhere. And then in 1869, the Russian chemist Mendeleev published his version of the periodic table, the same basic table we use today. But in 1869, only 63 of the 92 naturally occurring elements had been discovered. So there were big gaps that needed to be filled in, and naturally, they found the easier to find elements first. Rhenium was a more difficult element to find. It was found in 1925, so pretty late. It was actually the 5th to the last of the naturally occurring elements to be found. To put that in perspective, 1925, that was the same year as the monkey scopes trial, where a teacher in Tennessee was arrested for teaching the theory of evolution. So, you know, not that long ago, but also kind of long ago. Anyway, alas, rhenium would be the last stable and non-radioactive element to be discovered. The reason the other elements at the time hadn't been found yet is because a few of the elements on the periodic table are so radioactive that pretty much all of that element had decayed away already, and it was super difficult to find a way to detect them. I mean, we've only known about radioactivity since 1896, so like really not that long ago. We're, still figuring this stuff out today. So as far as who deserves credit for the discovery of rhenium, yes, I said earlier that Ida and Walter Noddacks were credited for discovering rhenium. They named it after all. Rhenium is named after the Rhine River region in Germany where they were from and where this soon-to-be delicious Westphalian wedding soup comes from. But there have been more recent developments about who should get credit for what. That goes to show just how difficult it has really been to nail down these extremely rare elements. And herein lies the problem. Often with these extremely difficult to extract elements, the people who discovered them, like Ida and Walter Noddacks, didn't actually produce a pure sample of the element. Rather, they were able to just prove that they had discovered a previously unknown element without like holding a hunk of it saying, I found it. That's the way there's some talk today. The Noddacks might not have actually been the true discoverer of rhenium, maybe at all. This kind of thing happened a lot with the, the later elements to be discovered. Everyone in the early 1900s knew there were only a few more naturally occurring elements to be found. When Mendeleev published the periodic table in 1869, right, only 63 of the 92 naturally occurring elements had been found. But it gave people this framework and, an idea of where to start looking for it. So for what would later be called rhenium-75 and technetium-43, the only clue was that they were in the same row as manganese, row 7. It was actually the only row with only one element yet discovered when Mendeleev published the periodic table. But yeah, the first person to announce the discovery of one of the other row 7 elements was actually a Japanese chemist named Masataka Ogawa, who declared in 1909 from a sample of thorianite while studying in England. Masatawa was a pretty interesting guy. He actually came from the samurai class, but became a scientist as, Japan was westernizing and, kind of getting included in the whole world economy and everything. So yeah, he was actually supposed to be looking for helium in a sample, but instead declared he found number 43 in the publication Chemical News and named it Nipponium after his home country. Nippon, or Nihon, literally means the sun's origin, as in the land of the rising sun, Japan. Okay, for the spätzle, I'm going to bring a pot of water to a boil while mixing together 1 cup of all-purpose flour, half a teaspoon ground nutmeg, half a teaspoon salt, and a pinch of freshly ground white pepper, 2 eggs, 1/4 cup milk, and combine all that. Okay, this was all well and good, but every other chemist in the world couldn't replicate what Ogawa had done. And that's the thing in science. You make an incredible claim, you need incredible evidence. But, you know, Japanese scientists in 2003 actually created an artificial element, number 113, and named it Rhenium in honor of Ogawa's near discovery. So yeah, this is where it gets weird though. So modern chemists seem to be pretty sure Ogawa actually discovered what would later become rhenium, but had it mixed up with 43. So it seems like there's still some pretty serious debate about who really discovered rhenium. So, you know, it just goes to show how complicated this stuff is, right? So for sure, in 1909, things were, you know, still a little primitive in science. So you could see how you could mistake one element for another, especially these really rare and sometimes radioactive elements. So, I mean, we still can't figure out what Ogawa actually discovered, but, you know, the universe is pretty convoluted sometimes. And oh yeah, get this, Ida and Walter Noddacks, along with a guy named Otto Berg, were able to extract 75 from 660 kilos of molybdenum ore, or 1,455 pounds. And it was actually from the Rhine River, that sample. So that, you know, makes sense with the name. So from that, they were able to extract a single gram of rhenium. That's just how rare this stuff is. Today, it's thought rhenium's abundance is about 1 part per million in Earth's crust. But here's the thing, in the past couple decades, chemists have analyzed the X-ray evidence and put forward the Noddacks and this other guy, Otto Berg, did not actually find rhenium, but had it confused with 43. So kind of like the opposite of what happened with Ogawa. And that was, of course, later discovered and called technetium. So it seems like this was debated for a while, but the Noddacks and the guy, Otto Berg, were actually right about rhenium after all. This just shows again how ridiculous the business of element discovery still is. Like almost 100 years after they first published their findings, there is still a debate about what really went down. And you know what's even funnier about this whole thing? Ida Noddacks would probably be a lot more famous today, if not for messing up on number 43. Yeah, they found rhenium, but then later on they declared they had also discovered 43, and her husband Walter published that they had found it, but they ended up being wrong, and their reputation was tarnished a little bit. And later on in her career, she was the first person to hypothesize about nuclear fission, but apparently was kind of ignored because of her false claim about 43 earlier. Nuclear fission was officially discovered in 1939, 5 years after Ida Noddacks put forward the idea, but still doesn't really get the credit for that. Okay, so rhenium, even though it's so rare, it's actually quite important. I remember saying in the last episode about tungsten that it's basically the real-life version of vibranium, but I may have been wrong there. Not only is rhenium the densest metal in the universe, it's the rarest. But again, you know, it didn't fall from a meteor 10,000 years ago in East Africa like vibranium did. Today, most rhenium still comes from refining down molybdenum and copper, but isn't really used on its own. I mean, for one thing, the stuff is like 2 grand per kilo, but it's, you know, it's way more useful as an alloy. If you add just a little bit of rhenium to other metals, it makes it way stronger. Those super alloys are mostly used in jet engines and other industrial applications, mostly because rhenium is resistant to rusting as well. But rhenium also doesn't play well with other elements. To my knowledge, only one naturally occurring mineral with rhenium and a non-metal has ever been found on Earth, and that was just in 1992. But, you know, there is a synthetic mineral, rhenium dibromide, ReB2, that is one of the hardest materials ever created. Like, it can scratch a diamond. So it's a pretty cool element. So that was rhenium, kind of, but not really discovered by Ogawa, then officially discovered by the Noddacks, then questioned, then reaffirmed. Well, anyhow, the Noddacks would have loved this soup. I almost guarantee you they had it on their wedding day. Wow, that is very good. But it needs a little extra. There we go. That's really good. Thanks. See you next time. So please like and subscribe. It's how I validate my existence, you know, getting more subscribers.